All right, welcome everyone to today's webinar, where we are going to speak with Lemongrass, learning how to deliver cost reduction for SAP on AWS. My name is Patrick Leung, and I'm from AWS, and I'll be your speaker and moderator for today's webinar. So let's get started. So first and foremost, let's do some introduction. I will start with myself. I've been with AWS for about 3 years in a variety of roles, supporting SAP customer on AWS. And most recently, I'm a solution architect supporting customer across EMEA. I'm looking forward to moderating the presentation today. And we have got an all-star lineup today from Lemongrass. Mark and Ben, can you please introduce yourself?
Thanks, Patrick. So just to introduce myself first. So I'm Mark Hurst. I run the EMEA region of Lemongrass, and I've been doing that for about 3.5 years now. So essentially, I spent the last 3.5 years really focusing on SAP on AWS, both from a build point of view and a migrate point of view, and then interoperate. So this is really becoming a speciality of ours. Prior to that, I've got about 28 years of SAP experience, predominantly in large enterprise SAP. Ben?
Thanks, Mark. Ben Lingwood. So I look after innovation and alliances in Lemongrass. I effectively run the technical architecture community and our technical community as well. So not quite as long in the tooth as Mark, but I've been in the SAP ecosystem for about 22 years, both in industry, in consulting, and 10 years inside SAP as well.
Right, perfect. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Ben. So let's have a quick overview of what we're going to talk about today. Mark and Ben are going to share their insights into the 5 key critical factors in how to build a business case on AWS, and then touch on what Lemongrass do. And then we'll move on to how to deliver the business case and why automation is the key to all this. And finally, the business case and costing template from Lemongrass as well. So let's start with a little bit of a history of SAP and AWS. We've been at this for a while, serving SAP customer, notably SAP themselves. SAP started using AWS initially to mainly provide demo environments to showcase their application on AWS. And through the years, we've started collaborating closer, initially with the SAP Business Suite and then SAP HANA. And you will find that we have been purposely building infrastructure for SAP for quite some time now. And our innovations allow us to serve even the most demanding customer. And you will see SAP themselves are building their own products and services on AWS as well. So now what all this means for you as a customer is that there is always something new from running SAP on AWS. As a matter of fact, you know you can run all the SAP NetWeaver-based product on AWS using the EC2 platform. However, what I want to point out is that all the products that are in orange, those are AWS only offering. So those are the things that are actually natively being hosted on AWS platform, and you will not find them anywhere else. So this really speaks to that partnership that we have with SAP and really speak to the amount of trust that SAP has in the AWS platform. I would like to quickly talk about some customer use case because we do believe that the best advocacy for our platform comes from our customer themselves. It was last year that we counted the number of SAP on AWS customer and announced that we have more than 5,000 SAP on AWS customer. So this slide is just an example of a number of customer. And the reason I'm pointing this out is because our CEO is actually pretty famous for saying that there is no compression algorithm for experience. What this effectively means is that we and our partner, like Lemongrass, learns lots of lessons about how to do it properly, about how to optimize, and how to do it safely and cost effectively. And these are the things that you only learn by doing this stuff over a long period of time. And what this means for you as a customer is that you get to inherit from all these skills that we have developed over the years. And we've got customers from practically every industry vertical. In the energy sector, we have customers like NG running their S4 Central Finance on AWS. In the financial service sector, we have AIG, who runs the general ledger system on AWS. So really, really mission critical for them. And in the manufacturing industry, we have the likes of Jaguar and Lamborghini. In the retail industry, we have the likes of Fast Retailing. They're better known as Uniqlo, and they have thousands of stores outside of Japan. And finally, the healthcare and aerospace industry. This is the key one because what they have in common are the security and compliance requirements such as HIPAA and ITAR. And one really good example is Lockheed Martin in the US. Lockheed Martin, as you might already be aware, is an aerospace and defense company. And so security is a top priority for them, and they are able to run their SAP system on AWS. And finally, this is an ISG provider report showing that AWS is the best platform for hosting SAP HANA workload. Two key highlights in this report is that what made AWS so successful for hosting SAP workload is, first of all, we have the most SAP certified instance type in the cloud. And these are true cloud native instances without using any co-location. And secondly, it is the partner ecosystem with extensive experience in this space that differentiate us. And Lemongrass is a prime example of this. And you can see this in the ISG provider report here on the right-hand side. They are the leader in this space for a number of reasons. The first one is that they only focus on SAP on AWS, which means that they are very, very specialized and extremely good at what they do. And also they are an organization that aligns very well with our leadership principle, very, very innovative and agile. And you can see this with the automation that they have built around SAP on AWS, which Ben and Mark are going to touch on later. And with this, I would like to hand over to Mark and Ben from Lemongrass.
So thanks, Patrick, for that introduction. So as Patrick suggested, I'm going to pick up the detail of this webinar and take you through where we believe we can deliver substantial cost reduction through migrating SAP to AWS. And I guess before I get into that, I just want to make a couple of points. So the first thing is the actual business case, where those cost savings come from, what those cost savings look like, how big they are, is actually fairly easy for us to convey. So we at Lemongrass have kind of done this quite a few times now. We've got 170 customers, we've got 3,500 live SAP systems. So we know where the cost savings come from, we know what they look like. So building the business case actually is the easy bit. And again, we'll kind of touch on the key points of that as we go through this presentation. Probably the harder bit, to some extent, is actually delivering that business case. So we're all aware of the kind of situation where we go and build a kind of financial plan, cost savings, kind of non-financial savings, all those kind of benefits, all those kind of things. That gets signed off by the board, the project happens, the business case gets put on the shelf. So the benefits therefore never get delivered, or the savings never get therefore delivered. So actually the harder bit for us is how do you deliver that business case? So actually I'm going to try and do two things in this presentation. So number one is kind of again, to kind of show where those cost savings come from. But secondly, share with you 5 critical success factors that are necessary to actually ensure those benefits, cost reductions and non-financial benefits are actually delivered. So those are 2 aims for the meeting. I firstly, however, wanted to give you a bit of an introduction to Lemongrass. As Patrick quite eloquently suggested earlier, there is no compression algorithm for experience. So I felt the reason I should probably kind of just give you a few slides in terms of who Lemongrass are and kind of what we do and where we come from. Our references is because it obviously credentializes the rest of the presentation. It shows where we've gained the experience to actually talk about financial savings. So 5 key points about us that probably summarizes the whole. So the first thing that's probably worth pointing out is this is all we do. We have a really, really simple proposition. We do SAP on AWS. We don't do other cloud platforms. We don't do other enterprise applications. We simply implement, migrate, operate, and then innovate SAP on AWS. It's a very focused thing that we do. Second thing is we've done this more than anybody. We saw in the kind of analyst quadrant earlier on that Patrick presented, Lemongrass is rated the leader in this space. That's partly because we have more referenceable SAP workloads on AWS than any other partner globally. So we have a track record of delivery, and we have a track record of delivering happy customers. As we go through this presentation, you'll hear me talk about automation quite frequently. We'll talk about it being an enabler for delivering cost reduction, delivering agility, delivering the kind of this dream of SAP on the cloud. And that's one of our big kind of differentiators at Lemongrass. So we're an automate first company. We aim to automate everything that we do, from migrations to build and ongoing operation. So we'll get into detail of that later on. Ben will give you a demonstration as we get into the body of the presentation. We're industry and geography agnostic. So we cover all verticals, and currently we work in about 15 countries. That's partly due to the fact that we have a very technical proposition. So we're not actually functional configuration experts. We're SAP basis layer down. That means our proposition is a global proposition. And then finally, you'll hear us talk about migrate, you'll hear us talk about operate quite a lot through this presentation. Actually, that's just the start of what we do. That's where we acquire a customer workload, that's when we start running it. But once we've done that, what typically then happens is a kind of entire sequence or number of waves of ongoing innovation. So maybe DevOps, maybe data lakes, maybe machine learning, maybe increased automation, whatever. So the final thing that we do is that kind of ongoing innovation and optimization post-migration. Just putting some numbers behind that. So again, very focused proposition, SAP and AWS. We have 170 plus customers. It's actually around 3,500 SAP workloads on AWS. We have, of those clients, of those 170, of those 3,500 workloads, they cover the good, the bad, the ugly, the highly complex, the quite messy, kind of the very old versions, very new versions of SAP. Across all of that, we've never failed to migrate SAP to AWS. We're 100% success rate in doing that. And we have about 300,000 users we support for our managed services. And again, all of that, you'll see the little logo at the bottom of the screen there. All of that is supported by or enabled by our automation platform, which is called Lemongrass Cloud Platform, LCP. And again, as I mentioned earlier, we are a global organization, initially founded in the UK, as a matter of interest. But today we work in about 15 countries. The blue dots that you see on the screen there are remote delivery centers. We have 4 of those. We then have kind of key operating regions we work in where we have key delivery people and kind of in-country resources. But we call ourselves a born in the cloud organization. What that means to me is we operate flexibly and we operate where our clients need us to be. So again, we have presence in capability and references in most regions in the world. And we've been doing this for a while. So Lemongrass is just over 10 years old. It's kind of interesting. Around 2010, so 2010 we founded the company. Around 2014, we decided to actually specialize solely on SAP on cloud. And so we've been in this kind of space kind of longer than probably anybody has. And as a consequence of that, and a consequence of the focus that we have, there's a number of firsts that we've delivered in this marketplace as a kind of indication of our innovation. So Seco, you'll see the logo at the top left there. That was the first ever migration of a production workload of SAP to AWS. We did that again around 2014. Just picking up 1 or 2 other interesting ones towards the bottom. We're the first organization to migrate HEC to AWS. We're the first migration to migrate from Azure to AWS. So we continue to be pioneers and innovators in the SAP on Amazon world. And again, to Patrick's point, there's no kind of compression algorithm for experience. This is just some of our customers. And again, as the point I made earlier, they represent all SAP products. They represent all ages of SAP platforms, supported and not supported. All sizes. We tend to be biased towards large enterprise, but actually we've got a spectrum of very small enterprise to very large enterprises. All sizes of databases from the few hundred megabytes to the several tens of terabytes. So essentially the good, bad, and ugly of the SAP world we've kind of experienced, and we've got kind of successfully migrated to AWS. And we cover the full life cycle. So from preparation, kind of including discovery, it's not unusual for our clients not to actually know what SAP they've got deployed, how is it integrated, what modules they've got, how old is it, what version, what patch levels. So we help our clients prep for the migration by kind of deploying discovery agents in the discovery phase. We can help them build the business case, which is kind of top of today's meeting. Then we want to implementation and migration, onto operate, post-operation into innovation, and then underlying that again is automation. So we do cover the full life cycle of the SAP migration, then operation on AWS. Right, so that's the background on us. Again, the point of that, I aim to cover it quite quickly because I don't want to bog this presentation down in sales collateral. But it's really there to demonstrate that we are qualified to talk about where cost savings come from. So let's get into the detail of that. So what I'm going to do now, 2 slides in succession. Firstly, some kind of high-level kind of percentage savings or some high-level messages around the cost saving that's achievable. And then I'm going to deep dive below that and kind of look at specifically how those savings are specifically enabled by each area. So probably the most important point is the first point on my slide here. Typically, and actually quite conservatively, we deliver around 60% operational cost saving by migrating SAP to AWS. And I'll come on to how we do that in a second. And when I mean operational saving, it's the kind of ongoing BAU support. Okay, so the basis support, the infrastructure monitoring and management, data center. So our clients achieve at least 60%. Some clients achieve as much as 90%. So again, I think I'm being a little bit conservative in that number. The second point is any migration we do of a workload from on-premise to cloud, there's typically a project that needs to enable that. So we have to do the discovery, as we talked about earlier. We have to build the systems. We have to migrate your data. We have to do the testing. We have to do remediation of integration, all those kind of things. So there's always a cost of doing that migration up front. The point I wanted to make, because the cost savings are so significant from that migration, it's not unusual for our clients to pay or to cover the cost of migration through the savings delivered in the first year of operation. That's with regard to BAU savings. The third point is actually we can go beyond BAU, business as usual savings. So everybody regards and knows SAP, to some extent quite rightly, as a hard to change, monolithic, expensive system. It's difficult to change, it's complex, you end up with massive projects, take years, etc., etc. One of the side effects and potential benefits of migrating SAP to the cloud is it opens up a new world of agility from a project point of view. So you take away the constraint of infrastructure, which historically has meant that kind of multiple changes to your SAP systems get bundled into kind of major releases, which then become complex, long drawn out. Using things like SAP DevOps, so automatic provisioning, automatic system refresh, automated transition, testing, all those kind of things, you can actually take a very different approach delivering change on SAP. And our clients are reporting up to 40% cost saving through simplifying and reduce the amount of time it takes to deliver change to your SAP landscapes. Fourth point, our clients are also seeing reductions from a replatforming that we go through or can go through as we migrate SAP to AWS. So some of our clients will do a very transformational migration or radically change the way they construct the SAP landscape and architecture. Other clients will do a lift and shift, and that lift and shift is of two types. Either it will be an absolute carbon copy move of what you've got already from on-prem to cloud, to Amazon. We would always recommend you go slightly beyond that in terms of take the opportunity to cloud optimize. It's not transformation, but just it's a means of taking into account cloud native tools, cloud native databases, cloud friendly databases, cloud friendly operating systems to simplify the architecture post migration to cloud. So a good example of that would be a move to maybe ASE, or essentially maybe from an Oracle platform to an ASE platform. Maybe a move away from HANA to ASE potentially, or reducing the license cost or the infrastructure cost associated with those databases. And the final thing is, whatever savings you achieve, whether it's 60%, 70%, 80%, whatever, and whether it's from the BAU or it's from the actual DevOps side of things, that's only the start. We'll see later in this presentation, Amazon delivers something like 1,500 innovations per year. That inevitably results in multiple cost-saving opportunities, which can be brought to bear on your landscape. So our clients have typically moved and immediately saved money. They then progressively realize savings month in, month out as those innovations get brought to bear on the client-specific solution. So that's the high-level kind of savings we see. I just want to drill into that in a bit more detail. So taking the first one, so what I'm going to do here is talk about each kind of layer of cost saving, look at the contribution that layer provides to the overall cost saving, then talk about some of the enablers. So the first one, the obvious one, most of our clients do as part of this migration, a complete data center clear out. So that will include SAP, it will include non-SAP. Typically as a point of interest, SAP is the first system that they migrate. The reason for that is, A, it's the huge footprint in the data center, so it's a big benefit to take it out. The second is a view that if you can migrate to SAP, it's big, complex, business critical. If you can do that successfully, then the rest of the stuff should be easy, sort of thing. So most of our clients do SAP first. And the savings are obviously quite easy. Obviously, your data centers, we all know, are expensive. They're expensive buildings, they're expensive to feed and water, they're expensive to manage. So obviously, the kind of savings associated with way of moving from either a kind of third-party data center or an own data center very substantial. So we see a reduction around 50 to 80% in terms of data center and infrastructure provisioning. Next layer down is the BAU operational support. So this is the basis support, the infrastructure support, the monitoring, fix and fail, all those kind of things. So we typically see approximately a halving of those costs. And the question is, why is that the case? And actually, a lot of the reason for that is twofold. Number one is, as we said earlier, and we'll see later in this presentation, we aim to automate as much as what we can do as possible. So things like patching, things like resolution of simple instance, things like upgrades, things like automatic stop-start, things like monitoring, etc., all fully automated and can be automated through moving to a cloud-based platform. So that drives down the cost. The second thing is, it's not unusual from an on-premise perspective to architect and size your SAP landscape based upon the peak business workload. You have to do that, but you can't change your capacity on a kind of on-demand basis. So it's not unusual, therefore, for your systems to be very significantly oversized and have sufficient capacity, not just for the peak, but the peak you expect to have in 3 to 4 to 5 years' time as your business grows. You do not need to do that on the cloud, clearly. It's an on-demand service. It can be scaled up, scaled down as you see fit or as your business needs. So one of the big cost savings we see is in right-sizing your SAP architecture. So you kind of size it for near the minimum need at this point in time, only grow it when needed, only scale it up when the business demands it. So substantial cost savings from there. License avoidance, 10 to 30%. I talked about this in the previous slide. Use the right database. A lot of people are trying to move to HANA at this point in time, or they're maybe stuck with kind of traditional Oracle license, something like that. Some databases are not cloud friendly, so you should take the opportunity to look elsewhere in terms of a more cloud friendly license agreement. Things like HANA, in-memory computing, etc., result in quite high in-memory infrastructure charges. So you need to consider whether those are the right target databases and optimize that. And again, as I said on the last slide, is use cloud native tools and ways of working when you move into the cloud. So rather than, for example, having a third party high availability cluster solution, which tends to be expensive, difficult to support, in some ways quite unreliable as well, don't use that as you move through the migration. Move to cloud native solutions such as availability zones, regions, or Alexa Compute, etc. Because of the stability of the architecture within Amazon, we find even for the most basic SAP systems and basic architectures, resilience and reliability and availability is substantially improved. So you will see a kind of improvement to the reliability of your applications. That obviously then results in a kind of a business benefit from that. And a good example actually of that is we worked what's called near zero downtime for our operate stream of business. And what we can do with that is using automation is bring to bear things like zero downtime patching, zero downtime upgrades, all of which means that you're not experiencing as a business the downtime you would with on-premise solutions. The final thing on this slide is beyond the business as usual, looking at the way we develop SAP. It's back to the point I mentioned earlier. Suddenly in a situation where infrastructure is not a constraint, that means two things. Number one is you can do as much change and development as you want. Number two is you don't have to be constrained the way you architect your projects and your programs by infrastructure. So rather than having a lot of changes all bundled together into one big release and then moving at the slowest kind of pace for those changes, you actually do each change on a one-by-one basis. We always moving at the maximum pace. So that delivers about 20–25% saving. So just to prove some of that, so I just wanted to kind of skim over 3 cases. I won't go into the detail, but I just want to kind of show that these savings are real. The first one is Seco. I mentioned Seco earlier. Seco are a global shipping and container company. They manage like 2.3 million containers across 179 locations. They had a challenge that they just had an Asian platform that was getting very expensive to operate and to own, essentially. So we migrated that to AWS, a fairly straightforward migration, to about 12 weeks. The referenceable cost savings in that migration was around 60%, but that is not the most interesting point. The more interesting point was the entire business was predicated on those costs. The entire move was predicated on those cost savings. However, probably more interesting is that post-migration, within the first year post-migration, the client made 2 acquisitions of businesses and did a major technical upgrade to their SAP estate. All of that, the client will go on record as saying, could not have been achieved without the benefits, the agility, and the ability to ramp up capacity or deliver DevOps type solutions of SAP and AWS. Second reference is Coca-Cola Price Check, who are one of Coca-Cola's largest bottlers. I think they're the second largest bottler within the Coca-Cola group, so in itself a massive business. It's a $2.9 billion bottling business. Similar challenges. They had an aging SAP estate, very high cost of support. Again, the kind of key take-home from this is we reduced ongoing operational costs by 50% at the point of migration. Now, actually, interestingly, we're probably into year 4 or 5 now of managing that system post migration, and year on year on year, we've driven down cost reduction every year. But the final kind of example, just to illustrate those benchmarks I presented earlier, is Friesland Campina. Friesland Campina are a global dairy company based in the Netherlands, $14 billion revenue, extensive SAP estate. A number of challenges here. So number one is cost of ownership. Secondly, they were involved in a fairly significant rollout program of new functionality as well. So we did that migration, again, a 10-month migration window. Initially, they were going to move to a non-cloud friendly database. We did a study for them and kind of came to the conclusion, which the client agreed, that a move to ASC would be better for them. ASC is SAP's own, one of SAP's own proprietary databases. The benefits of choosing that database solution was it had much more cloud-friendly license agreement. So that actually gave an immediate cost reduction of £2.7 million over 3 years, which more than paid for the cost of migrating them. The second thing I think is interesting is Friesland, in common with many other large enterprise customers, they have a large legacy estates. They're grown by acquisitions and mergers. They've got old SAP systems. There's a lot of old, what we call reference SAP systems in their IT landscape. They're sitting there, they're on hardware costs money, they're sitting in data centers, they're being managed, etc. They're needed only for regulatory compliance, not really actively used, but in the situation where you need to go and look back at some old finance data or HR data or file production data, you have to have those systems available. So one of our propositions we brought to bear was migrating those workloads onto Amazon, simplifying them, kind of going for simple database, simple architecture, and then literally turning them off. We then gave the client a mobile app, which allows them to turn those systems back on as a user, not for IT, but as an end user, only as and when they need to go and actually reference specific data. So the cost reduction in that approach was massive. So they reckon that they kind of achieved up to 90% cost savings through mothballing and application archiving. Okay, so that was the financial side. Obviously, there's a number of non-financial savings that you get from migrating SAP to AWS. And for me, I'm going to go through the detail of this slide. There's kind of 2 kind of key areas those savings fall into. So the first one is that when you've done the migration onto Amazon, you kind of become part of a world of ongoing innovation. That innovation may be led by Amazon in terms of the instance types they have and the certified SAP platforms, technology, or it may be the innovation that's being driven by their partners. So last year, there was something like 1,200, 1,300 innovations developed and deployed and made available to Amazon customers post-migration. So the point is, by using those, you can actually kind of look at those 1,200 kind of innovations, filter out which is relevant to your implementation, generally use them to drive either business benefit or cost reduction month in, month out. So essentially the migration is just the start of the journey. The second thing is that you also benefit, we talked about cost reduction to operate. There's also the kind of benefit I talked about previously of simplifying and accelerating the rates of change of your projects through things like DevOps, through things like automated testing, etc. So the point being, it's not just about financial savings. Okay, so that was all focused on quantifying the cost reductions that can be delivered from SAP on AWS. Kind of the challenge that I had is not actually quantifying them or documenting the business case. It's about how do you actively deliver or enable those cost savings. So to me, that's probably the harder question and kind of the bigger challenge. So do you want to spend a couple of slides looking into that? So I said earlier, there's 5 key success factors that we think are necessary to make sure that we deliver the cost reductions that we've talked about. So the first thing is actually that migration itself. So I talked about earlier, migrations need to move from on-prem to AWS. There are a number of approaches that you can use to make sure that's as quick as possible and to make sure the impact on your business is as little as possible. And obviously, if you're going to reduce the project time, you reduce the business impact, you reduce the cost and impact of that initial kind of migration period. So what we do to do that is we use a number of near zero downtime migration patterns. So they may be either standard SAP tools, they may be third-party products, or they may be near zero downtime patterns enabled by our own tooling, Lemongrass Cloud Platform. We also kind of recommend that you do your housekeeping before you do the migration. So things like making sure technical logs are cleared down, technical data is cleared down, making sure the database is maintained. All of those good things are kind of taken care of before you do the migration. So essentially, therefore, the migration is as minimized as possible. Integration and interfaces is a key challenge. So it's not unusual, again, as I mentioned earlier, for some of our clients and some of our systems to be, some of the systems our clients have to be over 20, 25 years old. That can mean that the understanding of those systems is quite limited. So what interfaces do I have? What integrations do I have? What printers do I talk to? What remote devices do I talk to? In many instances, that data has been lost in time, or information has been lost in time. So one thing to do to actually minimize the impact and cost of migration is to get ahead into rediscovering that information and making sure you have up-to-date integration log, interface logs, those kind of things. Again, we have tooling to do that. Second kind of key success factor is ensuring that SAP is architected for the cloud, AWS. So we've seen many situations where clients have migrated literally a kind of lift and shift in its truest sense of this word, what they have now over to Amazon, expecting cost reduction, expecting agility, and that just has not been delivered. Costs have gone up, and actually agility has been reduced for many reasons. So the second key success factor is ensuring the SAP solution is optimized for cloud-native ways of working, cloud-native tools, cloud-native concepts. The HACMP, High Availability Clustering concept, scenario represented earlier is a good example of that. Third thing is it's actually not about the migration project. We could come into to the client and do the migration for you, and no benefits delivered. There's no benefit delivered by just doing the migration itself. All of the benefits of migrating SAP to AWS, whether it's cost reduction, agility, innovation, whatever it may well be, are all delivered in a period of time post the actual migration project as part of the operate phase. So you have to make sure that the operate organization, which actually needs slightly different skill sets than the ones you probably have at this point in time, is also orientated and capable of ensuring that kind of costs are tracked, the systems are financially optimized, and that ongoing benefits are delivered. The fourth point is making sure that you pay attention to ongoing innovation. Again, back to the point I mentioned earlier, 1,200 innovations delivered last year by Amazon. They've inevitably got benefit to you as a client. Part of your ongoing operation is to be keeping track of those innovations, filter them out, figuring out which ones are relevant to yourselves, and make sure they're deployed to drive month-on-month cost reduction. And then the fifth thing is automation. So I've talked about it a lot. I won't dwell on it now. We believe SAP on AWS benefits, cost reduction, etc., are only delivered through high degrees of automation. We'll show you some of that in a second. So just bring some of those to life. I won't dwell on this a lot. This is just one of our patterns for delivering near zero downtime migrations. I won't dwell on it. It's using our own Lemongrass Cloud platforms to essentially take snapshots, then copy over kind of deltas to show you the kind of minimal downtime through the migration. And another slide, which is probably a bit of detail as well. What this is showing is a an optimized SAP and AWS operate organization. I wanted to make 2 points on this slide. So number one is, actually 3 points. Number one is you will need a capability in that team going forward that's focused on ensuring your architecture is optimized for the cloud. That's the first point. The second thing that you'll need in this support organization is somebody that's capable of and able to monitor the financial architecture of your solution. So again, new instance types, new server types were deployed from time to time. Somebody should be looking at those instance types and say, well, actually, if I deploy those, then I can reduce costs by X pounds, whatever it may well be. So you need somebody kind of focus on the financial optimization of the landscape as well. And as I said, as I've gone through this, automation is key to all of this. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague now, Ben, to take us through one of our key differentiators, Lemongrass Cloud Platform, talk about what it is, give you a demo of it, and show you how that can have a fairly dramatic effect on how you run your SAP landscape.
Thanks, Mark. So I thought I'd start with a bit of an overview, and then we'll get out of slideware and actually show you some real stuff, which is where the more interesting area is, in my humble opinion. So let's start off with a little bit of an overview about how we segment the capability features that sit within the Lemongrass Cloud Platform. Distinctly, they fall into 3 families, 3 modules. The first one being discover and migrate, and no prizes for guessing on that one does. But essentially, as Mark articulated, these are areas where we can trip up sometimes when you're looking at migration. So things for us that customers often miss are things like operating system scripts, or actually discovering what is running in your landscape, looking at the versions and dependencies and attached storage, and all the little things that are sometimes missed in documentation or in people's heads that never made it into a technical schedule. Other key areas are things like interfaces. And this is an area that we've seen a lot of issues in the past, without naming customers, organizations that have had interface registers that they had sworn are correct, and actually after deploying our interface discovery tool, found out is out as much sort of 50–60% where there's additional interfaces occurring that they weren't aware of. So the ability to monitor, capture, and then keep monitoring those interfaces going forward as you go into an operating model, really important for both migration and discovery, and then more importantly further down as well when you look at security as well, if there's undetected interfaces coming in. So there's a bunch of tools, capabilities and technologies that sit within that discover and migrate capability. Once it's in, build and operate is really, for me, the most important area. Think of this as the automatic hands, right? This is where, if you're a SAP savvy person, this is where a lot of basis gets automated, a lot of day-to-day checks get automated, backups and restores and patching and OS kernel updates and all the things that typically burn time maintaining and operating an SAP landscape. And to Mark's point earlier, this is really where we see the true cost saving. The cost of migrating is just getting in. The cost of maintaining is where you get that real deep saving over a number of years, which keeps getting better as the automation gets better. We'll take you through some of that in a little bit. And then finally, on the right-hand side, collaborate, govern, and secure. I think it's true to say with great flexibility also comes great risk. And we've seen this with organizations with people turning on lots of systems unchecked. And it's easy to turn a light switch on, and as any teenage parent will tell you, they don't always turn it off. So having the ability to check that those systems are being controlled, that the right people can activate them, that the policies are there to turn them off, that we've got cost reporting sitting over the top, so granular cost reporting. We report down to the hour with cost alarms and workflows sitting on top of that and reporting. Very, very important that you've got the governance, the methodology, and the change management capability around that to make sure that what you're running is what you should be running. Anyone starting systems is authorized to do so, and that the spend is where it needs to be. Flexibility can go both ways, remember. So without further ado, let's get out of slideware and actually look at a system. So what I'm going to look at in the first instance, and this is part of our build and operate software, so that middle box that I showed you earlier, is looking at something simple. So in this instance, we're going to look at building a HANA system. Now, it's important just to articulate what this system is and importantly what it isn't. So if you're SAP familiar, you'll know that SAP publish a lot of integration capabilities. There's a lot of APIs, WSDL, SOAP interfacing. There's a lot of ways you can naturally interface with SAP programmatically and decoupled through through decoupled architecture. It's what it's designed to do. And equally in Amazon, if you're familiar with Amazon, you'll know there are hundreds and hundreds of services, and Amazon is completely designed from the roots up to be programmatically accessible. So everything that we're doing with our orchestration layer is effectively that we are linking the API and the interface intersects with SAP, with the same with Amazon, and bringing those two together in an SAP-aware interface. So there's absolutely nothing proprietary, completely replaceable from that perspective. So what you're looking at on the screen is basically a list of all of the EC2 assets right now certified for SAP, and there's a huge great list of these, and is a simple way to simply browse down and look at all of the EC2 types that you could use for SAP deployment. And if you're familiar with SAP, you'll know sometimes that's a little bit of a headache because you've got to go and check SAP notes, you've got to go and check what's certified. But once you've selected the EC2 type, you've then got to look at all the different types of storage. You can use different types of storage for different jobs. Some are more expensive, some are cheaper. So we've taken the heavy lifting out of that as well. So behind each one of these is a reference architecture that uses the most optimal resource from Amazon available and certified by SAP to meet the job that it's intended. So that's all wrapped together quite nicely. So I've got a few options from here. I can obviously click through here and I can look at the details behind each virtual machine. I can sort by what type of machine I want. So for example, if I want to look at a terabyte box here, the system has now sorted all the different ways that I can achieve a terabyte within Amazon right now. And I'm running this from Virginia, from a demo system. And you can see everything from huge, great dedicated bare metal systems down to smaller clusters of smaller machines further down here. So I could select, for example, the host count if I want to go from scale out to scale up. And that will simply sort down now the systems available, which are on the screen. So very simple to start filtering around and looking at which machine images that I can use. But back to my previous point, I will take that out before I start racking up a bill. The next objective here is we can look at the workload. What am I doing? So if I'm in development and test, for example, these tend to be for things like sandbox systems or training systems or transient project systems. So you know what? I don't always need production grade storage for those systems. It's not necessarily needed if there's a small number of users. I do have any production grade storage, which you can see if I click on that, it turns green for compute and storage if I'm running it for production workloads. Dead important, if you know SAP and you raise an OSS note, the first thing that they'll ask is, what's the hardware, what's the spec? So you need to make sure you're on compliant hardware, very important. Otherwise the message might be, please go and move it to compliant hardware, which obviously can be a problem. So let's go ahead and look at development and test. And then lastly, again, in this demo anyway, we're looking at the high availability. So I'm looking inside the North Virginia region here, and I can look at whether I can deploy this on 1, 2, or 3 availability zones in the region. We have other patterns, cross-region, multiple availability zones, many other ways that can be described, but typically 2 to 3 is perfectly enough for the SLAs required. Simple mathematics, more of them they are, the better the uptime. No rocket science on that. So I'm going to go for 2 on this one, and I'm going to go for, let's go for an R5X large here. Okay, so back to the point earlier, you can see the system has automatically selected 2 of those. It selected the right type of disk, GP2 in this case, that's needed for the persistent store for HANA. Remember, that's got to be quick disk to load it up into memory nice and quickly. That's required for a performance system if you restart it. We can see it's 32 gig. In this model, we can see it's on demand as well, just in this model, and that is the princely sum of just under $1 an hour to run those 2 machines. Now, herein comes another area to think about, is how to buy the system. Now, this is where you've got to ask yourself, what are you going to be doing with the machine? Okay, so if you're running this for a production workload that's always going to be on, you know what, it is always going to be cheaper to go for a longer term reserved instance, like a 3-year all up front or an equivalent savings plan. That's going to give you around 70 to 77% saving. That's quite significant. If it's for a project that's running for a year and you know what, it's going to be on most of the time because you're running across multiple time zones, then maybe a 1-year reserved instance is going to be good, and that kind of splits the difference in the cost there. Or, like I'm doing on the demo here, this is quite an ephemeral system. It's going to exist for a short activity, a few days, a few weeks, maybe nothing long term. Then on demand is absolutely fine. And if it is for very low training purposes, then you know what, even consider spot. That is another option as well. So you can choose the type of system depending on what you plan to do with the system. So this is just one tool. We have others that do more detailed modeling, but this is just a way of looking at which one you'd like to select. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with on demand. And then it's as simple as choosing a choosing a host name for my system here. So this can be anything. I like free text based on your naming standard. I can choose the HANA installer. So I'm going to choose HANA 2, and let's go for patch 243 here. And it's important to know at this point what the system is doing in the background. So it's actually using linked into your SAP Marketplace account. So there's effectively a repository server that sits behind. It uses your S number, logs in representative from your organization. So it's actually using the media downloaded from SAP Marketplace, sap.com, certified that you're able to use under your license agreement. So we're not bending any rules here. It's using your media sets, your binaries under your account. Okay, so that's very important again, and another reason why this is an orchestration tool. We can look at the SAP SID here. So that can be anything again, based on whatever your naming standard is. So I'll just put dem for demo. The SAP instance, typically that's 00, but depending on what your instance number strategy is, you might want to change that. So again, you've got flexibility there. The backup schedule. So I'm not going to dwell on this, but there's another screen inside the tool where you can build your backup schedule, how you want to back it up, and the retention period. So I've gone for a weekly backup model here for a non-production system. So it's just a week, and I'm doing a full backup on a Sunday, and then Monday through Saturday, just incrementals and snapshots as well. So I can define how I want to back that system up. Again, that's completely SAP native, Amazon native. And then lastly, looking at the environment. So this relates to the landing zone. And if you're familiar with the landing zones, you'll know typically you're setting up a different VPC account in an area depending on what the environment is. So it could be a sandbox or a dev or a QA or a pre-production, production, DR, whatever your strategy is for your landing zone. And again, we've got that automated as a build as well. But that's also driven by my role. I can only deploy in the areas that I have permission to do so. Back to my point around, I shouldn't be able to spin up expensive boxes or huge boxes if I'm not authorized to do so. And I can cap the limit on that as well. Just a few final points. The availability zone. So in Virginia here, there are 6 availability zones. It's one of the larger regions. So I can select that if I've got a preference. The DNS prefix, so that's for the technically minded of you, just a C name. So that's just a friendly name, so I can link it to customer.com or whatever your company name is, so it's addressable in your own organization. And then the system password, again, it's a default in here, but it can be set to the system password policy that you have. So whether that's the ingredients of that, the cipher of that, and the number of times that changes as well, that can all be set as well. So now that I've given it all the variables and the cost model and everything else, it's as simple as clicking deploy, confirms the pricing, and I just say okay. So as you can see, you do not need to be a technical user to do actually something that's pretty technical. So from benchmarks internally, we locked one of our best engineers in the cupboard and actually put a timer and said, right, go build an SAP system, download the media, build the EC2 instances, construct the environments, install the SAP, patch the system, stop the timer at the end when you can log on. And the answer was between sort of 10 to 16 hours, depending on the depth of the complexity there. But what you've just seen is quite a complex environment build, actually done with a few mouse clicks. So just again, back to the point Mark was making, you only have to do these sorts of things a few times for the TCO to really start ramping up, especially if you're doing high repetitive tasks in the environment. So that's building away. But in true cooking show style, here's one I prepared earlier through exactly the same procedure. And we can see that the system is up and running. I can see that there's my A and my B node running, so I know that that's running. I know that this is a cluster, because look, I can see the name server and the index server running, and I can see sync mem. So that's the mode inside HANA anyway, where the memory is held in synchronous replication between 2 machines. So I know that that's running. If we're looking at near zero downtime options, some simple things. If I want to invoke a failover and make the secondary the primary and vice versa, I can click the button to do that. If I want to do an event-based action, I can turn it from a scale up to a scale out. Maybe if this system is going to be used for BW, right? I can add a site onto the system and patch it. So for example, some quite complex things. So if I wanted to move this into another environment, I actually wanted to patch the system, we'll leave it in 240, but patch it up to 245, patch the Linux version, and maybe even move it to another availability zone, I can start to express these programmatically. If you think what that's doing, it's doing a technical upgrade on the system, patching the operating systems, it's doing the call out on the Linux libraries, and if I want to, also doing the move to another availability zone. So some quite complex things that we can start to programmatically describe. If we look at individual systems even, let me just click on one of the nodes here. I can see that it's up and running. I can monitor the system. So look, I can see all the thread activities. It's an empty database server, so as you'd expect, just the index server running at the top. But I can do that deep level monitoring, and this is how we start looking at some of the self-healing capabilities. So for example, if I'm watching the mount utilization, or if I'm looking at the volume utilization, I can start to see if the mount starts to fill up, I can put a rule in that auto extends it but raises a low priority ticket. So I can go and see why it's going up, but I'm not going to let the system crash. I'm going to keep an eye on that. Okay, and then other typical actions that we see in an SAP typical operation mode, things like an ad hoc backup, restarting the system. Maybe I want to do a point in time recovery, and I want to take the system, let's say, back an hour to go back to a previous time. That's possible as well. So I can use that for things like restoring to a previous point if there was an issue. Configuring idle stop. This is a personal favorite. If you have developers, as I said earlier, who like leaving the lights on, put in a parental rule here that says, look, if they don't log on after 30 minutes, and I'm going to leave that on, turn it off. So some simple operational changes that we can make to make sure that you're getting the most out of your efficiency from moving to cloud. There's a whole host of other areas, but just to highlight on some of those. Okay, so this leads us on to the concept of what we call DevOps. So as Mark mentioned earlier, so this is actually a case scenario from a live customer environment. So this was quite a large environment. This system was always on. It had also quite an extensive non-productive environment as well. So this is where we can start to simplify that environment by using some of those features that I just went through. So you can see here underneath what we did first of all is we got rid of 2 of those environments from the release tier. I don't need to have a 5-tier release landscape always on. That's pretty heavyweight. So we can immediately turn those off and go down to 3-tier. And in fact, as you saw earlier, I can simply schedule those systems to be able to be up only for business hours when those systems are needed. Now, if the customer did need larger amounts of systems, what we can quickly do is, using our cloud platform solution, we can do a build from a copy, much like the demo that I've just shown you. And I can schedule that, I can do that on demand, a number of ways that I can programmatically change that if I need to. So in this model, the customer could want to move to a dev, do their activity, move that into testing, trash the dev system, finish the testing, move it into the correction system, finish doing the corrective actions that they've done, move it back up into the approval system, and then release that into production. So it means at the times that they're not doing an active project or an active change, they have 0 run costs for those systems. So you can see here that's a quick and easy way to actually take out a very large percentage of their operate costs. So if you're wondering how Mark got some of those numbers on some of those slides before, that's how they did it. Moving on, so one other point, as I mentioned earlier, is Finops, what we call financial operations. So that's a very important area, as I mentioned before. Enabling financial tracking is very, very important that you're keeping an eye on that. So again, as you can see on the right-hand side screenshot here, there is a link to a little screenshot there that's one of our mobile applications. And this is showing what the customer is spending day by day. And there's a few things we can call out from that. So number one, I can put alerting thresholds on that, so I can know what I'm supposed to spend during the month. If I go near that or go over that, I can immediately raise an alarm so we can work out why. Also means, and we put this app in the hands of CFOs in our organizations, that they can see month on month what they're spending. And it also means that I can see here, you can see there's kind of peaks and troughs. So that's a heartbeat, I'm looking for that. So I want to see that people are turning systems on and turning systems off. That's healthy cloud use. I don't want to see a flat line. I want to see a pulse. I want to see the fact that people are using cloud agility to bring the costs down and up during peak periods as well. It also means if I'm saying, for example, if they've committed to a reserved instance but are not using it, I can start to tune the system down. Maybe I can tune down to a smaller size. Maybe they've committed to that reserved instance and I can cache that down to a smaller family. Or maybe, as we said earlier, a new family of innovations come out, maybe a cheaper type of box, and I want to move on to that and I want to see the efficiencies. So that fine-grained tracking alerting, really, really important when you're looking at financial management. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of an overview about some of the areas in automation. And with that, I will hand back to Mark.
Thanks for that, Ben. So as we've mentioned as we've gone through this slide set, our clients tend to have 2 main objectives of moving to the cloud. The dominant one is cost reduction. The secondary one is usually agility. and as both myself and Ben have suggested through this, that can only be enabled through very focused, very specific levels of SAP on AWS automation. That we deliver through Lemongrass Cloud Platform. And hopefully there, Ben has demonstrated some of the tools we can bring to bear that will drive costs down and increase agility. So now just to wrap up, next steps. So if you're interested in anything we've talked about through this presentation, whether it's the business case, or whether it's the cost of doing a migration, or the automation platform, what it may well be. So we have a number of accelerators to help you build a business case, to help you assess the cost, etc. So if you're interested in actually exploring any of those, they in themselves are quite automated. So we just need a very simple set of information from you to populate, cause the population to happen. Then please do get in contact. So I had two aims for this call. Number one was to show you where cost reductions can lie. In today's economic climate, I guess we all try to keep a focus on cost and deliver cost reductions. So hopefully I've showed you where we can drive cost out of your SAP estate. Second thing, which again I think is the bigger challenge, is to ensure that you actually, how do you guarantee that you can deliver those cost reductions and other benefits as well. So those were my two aims. I hope we've covered those two aims as we've gone through this. And it's just for me to say thank you and wrap up.
With this, I would just like to say thank you to Mark and Ben for joining us today. And I'll say that we really want to encourage you to reach out to us, and we can help you with proof of concept. We would love to experiment with customer together with Lemongrass, and we can explain this in much more details as Mark mentioned, and explore potential migration strategy for your SAP estate. And I hope that you find this useful, and thank you again for taking the time out to attend this webinar.